There is a specific kind of alarm that moves through defense establishments slowly at first, then all at once. It does not announce itself with a single dramatic event. It builds through an accumulation of satellite images, intercepted technical data, modeling assessments, and intelligence reports that individually seem manageable but collectively point towards something that fundamentally changes the strategic landscape. That is what has been happening inside the Pentagon, inside NATO planning offices, and inside the classified briefing rooms, where America's nuclear strategists do their work. China is not just modernizing its nuclear arsenal, it is doing something that the United States has not had to seriously contend with since the height of the Cold War. It is building toward nuclear parity, not symbolic parity, not the kind of minimum deterrent posture China maintained for decades, enough weapons to survive a first strike and retaliate, but not enough to genuinely threaten American strategic dominance. Something larger, something more sophisticated, something that is emerging faster than American intelligence assessments predicted even 5 years ago, and incorporating technological capabilities that existing missile defense architectures were simply not designed to defeat. The numbers are stark. In 2020, the U.S. Defense Department estimated China possessed approximately 200 nuclear warheads. By 2023, that estimate had risen to around 500. Current assessments project China could have over 1,500 warheads by 2035, putting it within range of the deployed arsenals maintained by the United States and Russia under existing arms control frameworks. That trajectory, from 200 to 1,500 in 15 years, is not a modernization program. It is a fundamental strategic transformation, and the weapons being built to carry those warheads represent a generational leap in capability that makes the numbers only part of the story. The moment that forced American defense analysts to publicly revise their assessments came in the summer of 2021, when commercial satellite imagery revealed construction underway at 3 separate locations in remote areas of western China. What was being built were missile silos, not a handful, not a test facility. Hundreds of them, arranged in geometric patterns across the desert landscape of Gansu, Xinjiang, and Inner Mongolia, in a construction program operating simultaneously at a scale that had no recent historical precedent outside the Cold War. The Human Field in Gansu province alone contained over 100 silos under construction. The Hami Field in Xinjiang added more. A third field near Ordos in Inner Mongolia completed a deployment pattern that, taken together, represented the most significant expansion of land-based nuclear infrastructure anywhere in the world since the Soviet Union's peak construction periods in the 1970s and 1980s. The silos being built are sized for China's DF-41 intercontinental ballistic missile, currently the most capable land-based nuclear delivery system in the Chinese arsenal. The DF-41 carries multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles, meaning a single missile can deliver warheads to several different targets in a single flight. Its range of approximately 12,000 to 15,000 kilometers puts the entire continental United States within reach from launch sites deep inside Chinese territory. And its road-mobile variant, which can be driven to different launch positions and fired from locations that are not fixed and therefore not pre-targeted, adds a survivability dimension that fixed silos alone do not provide. The scale of the silo construction raised an immediate strategic question that American analysts are still working through. China is building far more silos than it currently has missiles to fill them. This could mean China intends to build enough missiles to fill every silo. It could mean the silos are designed as a shell game, with a smaller number of actual missiles rotated between a larger number of potential launch positions, forcing an adversary to target all of them to guarantee destruction of the actual weapons. Either interpretation, or some combination of both, represents a sophisticated strategic calculation rather than simple expansion for its own sake. The silo expansion, alarming as it is not the capability that has American defense planners losing sleep in quite the same way. That distinction belongs to China's hypersonic weapons program, which has advanced to a level of demonstrated capability that existing American missile defense systems were not designed to address and cannot currently defeat. In October 2021, China tested a hypersonic glide vehicle that circled the Earth at orbital velocity before descending toward a target. The test was not announced by China and was revealed through intelligence reporting. When American officials confirmed it, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs described it publicly as very close to a Sputnik moment, which for someone in that role represents extraordinary candor about a security concern. A hypersonic glide vehicle is fundamentally different from a traditional ballistic missile in ways that matter enormously for defense. A ballistic missile follows a predictable arc. Radar systems can detect it shortly after launch, calculate its trajectory within minutes, and provide warning time that allows defensive interceptors to be positioned and fired. The physics of ballistic flight make the weapon's path knowable, and knowable paths can be defended against with sufficient interceptor capability. A hypersonic glide vehicle does not follow a predictable arc. It reaches hypersonic speeds, defined as Mach 5 and above, and then glides through the upper atmosphere on a trajectory that can be altered during flight. It can maneuver to avoid interceptor missiles. It can approach a target from unexpected directions. It flies at altitudes between the flight envelope of traditional ballistic missiles and the operational ceiling of cruise missiles, a band of airspace that existing radar networks and interceptor systems cover poorly. And it does all of this while maintaining enough speed that reaction time, even with perfect detection, may be insufficient for a successful intercept. China has designated its primary hypersonic glide vehicle the DF-17, and it has been displayed publicly in military parades and is assessed to be operational with Chinese rocket forces. The DF-17 is a medium-range system designed for regional targets rather than intercontinental strikes. But the orbital hypersonic test conducted in 2021 demonstrated a longer-range variant of the underlying technology, one capable of delivering a nuclear warhead to targets anywhere on Earth via a trajectory that approaches from directions and at altitudes that American early warning systems are not optimized to detect and track. Land-based missiles and hypersonic glide vehicles are visible, trackable, and at least theoretically targetable in ways that represent challenges to existing systems rather than complete breaks from the strategic framework that nuclear planners have operated within for decades. China's expanding submarine-launched nuclear capability represents something that sits in a different category entirely, because submarines, when operating effectively, are genuinely invisible. China's Type 094 ballistic missile submarines, of which it operates 6 with more under construction, carry the JL-2 submarine-launched ballistic missile. The JL-3, an improved successor with significantly greater range, is assessed to be entering service and will allow Chinese submarines to strike targets across the continental United States while operating in waters close to Chinese shores, under the protective coverage of Chinese anti-submarine forces and land-based aviation. Previous generations of Chinese submarine missiles had ranges that required submarines to operate in open ocean waters far from Chinese protection, where American anti-submarine warfare assets could more effectively track and potentially target them. The JL-3's extended range eliminates that vulnerability entirely. The strategic significance of a survivable sea-based deterrent cannot be overstated. The entire logic of nuclear deterrence rests on the ability to absorb a first strike and still retain enough weapons to retaliate with devastating effect. Land-based missiles, even those in hardened silos, are fixed targets that a sufficiently large and accurate first strike could theoretically destroy. Submarines that cannot be located cannot be targeted, and weapons that cannot be targeted before they fire cannot be destroyed before they fire. A credible sea-based deterrent is what transforms a nuclear arsenal from a first-strike vulnerable force into a genuine second-strike capability, and China is building one at a pace that American naval planners are watching with sustained and serious attention. New warheads, new missiles, and new submarines change what a nuclear arsenal can do. What changes how a nuclear arsenal operates is the command, control, communications, and intelligence infrastructure surrounding it. China has been investing in this dimension of its nuclear capability with a thoroughness that reflects sophisticated understanding of how modern nuclear operations actually work and what vulnerabilities previous Chinese systems contained. For most of its nuclear history, China maintained its weapons in a de-alerted posture, meaning warheads were stored separately from delivery systems and would need to be mated and prepared before use. This posture was a deliberate strategic choice, reflecting both the minimum deterrence doctrine China officially maintained and practical considerations about the risk of accidental or unauthorized use. It also meant that Chinese nuclear forces required significant preparation time before they could be employed, creating a window of vulnerability during a crisis that an adversary could theoretically exploit. The infrastructure being built alongside the new missiles and silos suggests China is moving away from this posture toward a higher state of readiness. Hardened command facilities, redundant communications networks designed to survive nuclear strikes, and early warning satellite systems that give Chinese leadership the ability to detect incoming missiles within minutes of launch, all point toward a force that is being configured for prompt response rather than deliberate second-strike employment following extended preparation. That shift, from a force that needs time to be readied to one that can respond immediately, represents a fundamental change in the operational character of China's nuclear capability and introduces crisis stability concerns that arms control experts describe with considerable urgency. Walk through the specifics of what these weapons can do, because the technical details are what connect the abstract strategic analysis to the concrete reality of what American cities and military installations are facing. The DF-5B is a liquid-fueled intercontinental ballistic missile that has been in service for decades, upgraded repeatedly, and assessed to carry multiple warheads with a yield in the megaton range. Megaton range warheads are city-destroying weapons. A single DF-5B warhead detonating over a major American metropolitan area would produce immediate casualties in the hundreds of thousands and long-term effects that would dwarf any disaster in American history. China currently maintains dozens of these missiles in hardened silos. The DF-41 is the successor generation, solid-fueled, meaning it can be launched much faster than liquid-fueled systems that require fueling before launch. Road-mobile variants can be dispersed across vast areas of Chinese territory and are effectively impossible to target with confidence. Silo-based variants benefit from the shell game dynamic the new construction creates. Multiple warhead capability means each missile that survives to launch can strike multiple targets. The combination of survivability and multiple warheads means that even a highly successful American first strike, the kind that would be extraordinarily difficult to execute against a dispersed and hardened force, would not prevent devastating retaliation. This is deterrence working exactly as designed. The problem, from the American strategic perspective, is that deterrence built on mutual vulnerability requires accepting that Chinese nuclear forces can survive and retaliate against any American attack. For most of the nuclear age, this has been the reality of the relationship with Russia. It is a reality the United States has not had to fully confront with China, and adjusting to it requires rethinking assumptions that have shaped American nuclear strategy and force planning for 30 years. None of this strategic transformation exists in a vacuum separate from the specific regional tensions that give it immediate operational relevance. The nuclear expansion China is pursuing is happening simultaneously with intensifying pressure on Taiwan, expanding Chinese military activity in the South China Sea, and a Chinese military modernization program explicitly oriented toward the ability to fight and win a conflict against American forces in the Western Pacific. The connection between nuclear expansion and conventional military ambition is not accidental. Nuclear weapons do not just deter nuclear attacks. They create a strategic umbrella under which conventional military operations can be conducted with reduced fear of escalation to existential levels. A China with a larger, more survivable, and more sophisticated nuclear arsenal is a China that can contemplate conventional military action against Taiwan, with greater confidence that American responses will be constrained by the nuclear balance in ways they would not be against a conventionally superior but nuclear modest adversary. This is the logic that American strategists find most concerning about China's nuclear buildup, more so even than the direct nuclear threat itself. The expansion of the nuclear arsenal may be less about China actually wanting to fight a nuclear war, which no rational actor wants, than about creating the strategic conditions under which Chinese conventional military power can be exercised more freely. Nuclear weapons as the foundation for conventional aggression rather than the ultimate backstop against existential threat. That is the strategic concept that American planners are working urgently to understand and develop responses to. The United States is responding to China's nuclear expansion on multiple tracks simultaneously. The nuclear modernization program that has been underway for several years, replacing aging Minuteman III missiles with the new Sentinel ECBM, upgrading the submarine-launched Trident missile, and developing a new nuclear-capable cruise missile, is being accelerated and in some cases expanded beyond previously planned scope. Missile defense investments, focused on systems potentially capable of engaging hypersonic glide vehicles, are receiving funding and attention that was not present at the same level 5 years ago. What is notably absent from the American response is any meaningful arms control framework covering Chinese nuclear forces. The New START treaty that limited American and Russian deployed strategic warheads expired in 2026 without renewal, leaving the two largest nuclear arsenals in the world without any bilateral limits for the first time since the 1970s. China has never been party to a bilateral nuclear arms control agreement with the United States and has consistently declined to participate in trilateral negotiations that would cap Chinese forces at levels China considers inconsistent with its legitimate deterrence requirements given its trajectory of growth. The arms control void means that the nuclear expansion underway in China is unconstrained by any international agreement, proceeding at whatever pace Chinese planners determine is appropriate for their strategic objectives, with no verification mechanisms providing American analysts with the transparency that arms control treaties historically provided about the size and composition of adversary nuclear forces. Step back from the technical details and the strategic analysis and look at what the trajectory of China's nuclear program means for the world that emerges from it. For the first time since the Cold War, the United States faces the prospect of two peer nuclear adversaries simultaneously, Russia maintaining its massive arsenal while China builds rapidly toward comparable scale, with no arms control framework governing any of it, and strategic relationships with both countries in states of serious tension. The nuclear order that governed the most dangerous period of the Cold War was built on bilateral relationships, mutual transparency, and shared interest in avoiding catastrophic miscalculation. That order was imperfect, and the stability it provided was never guaranteed, but it existed and it functioned well enough that nuclear weapons were never used after 1945. The order being built now is different. It is multipolar, less transparent, and operating without the arms control architecture that provided at least partial confidence in adversary intentions and capabilities. The weapons being unveiled by China are real, their capabilities are demonstrated, and the strategic logic driving their development is coherent from Beijing's perspective, even as it is alarming from Washington's. The shock that American officials express when confronted with China's nuclear expansion is genuine. But underneath the shock is a more uncomfortable recognition. The strategic situation being created was not inevitable. It emerged from decades of assumptions, policy choices, and failures of imagination about what a rising China would eventually decide it needed. Those decisions cannot be unmade. The weapons being built cannot be unbuilt. What can be changed is how clearly everyone involved understands what has been created, and how urgently the absence of any framework for managing it gets treated as the defining security challenge it actually is. The missiles are real, the silos are full, and the world just got significantly more complicated.